Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcasts and videos dedicated to training the next generation of health IT leaders. Today, we're going to talk about digital transformation, Windows Desktop, AI, and creating the best work experience for your staff. Maybe we'll get to all those things. It's an awful lot to get to. We'll see. This podcast is brought to you by Health Lyrics. Want to start your health IT project on the right track? Want to turn around a failing project? Let's talk. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. Our guest today is the wonderful Sarah Richardson with Healthcare Partners at DaVita Medical Group company. Good morning, Sarah, and welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning, Bill. Thanks for having me back. This is our third round of conversations on your show.
Yeah, it's third round on this show, but you're a professional podcaster, and I'm actually on your show this month, although we recorded it some time ago.
Yeah, we have to put a plug in for you. You are this month's featured guest on the HIM SoCal podcast, talking about a digital hurricane and how to forecast what's coming in the technology space. It's a great episode, so I encourage everybody to listen to it on iTunes.
Yeah, I stole some of Jonathan Manis's material, and we talked about it a little bit. And actually, it's not original with Jonathan either. So I guess we're all just taking material. You have a little different approach to your podcast is a lot more polished than mine. I mean, you have a video production crew. You have a studio where you record in. You've had and it has much more of a polished feel. Is that by design? Did you choose your format?
I did, and the reason we did it that way is because as the SoCal chapter of HIMSS, we have the largest membership in the US, and we had to pick these big, meaty topics and talk about one thing with the selected subject matter expert really in the HIT industry to do that. And the intent was always to be about 25 to 30 minutes of consumable content for Southern California commuters, whether you're on the train, you're on the bus, you're in your car, etc. And so by diving into one subject, it was twofold. I, as the interviewer, have to really jump in and learn everything I can about what we're going to talk about. And then I have to do all that prep time with that guest who's going to be on the show, aligning the topic, obviously, with something that's of interest to our listeners. And it goes in the archive. So it's about one big thing happening in the industry. Whereas what I love what you do is you're like, what's going on right now? Like keeping us up to date and current and thinking about things that are happening. This is more of a holistic, almost learning approach to something that's big happening in the industry that people can kind of sink their teeth into and think about. And then if they had to reach out to that speaker or myself or whomever otherwise, they have that platform to be able to do that.
Yeah, and my format is really informal conversations with CIOs and industry influencers, and it was also a conscious decision based on just, I mean, we sit around at these conferences, and I just marvel at the great conversations we were able to have, the meatiness of it, and the topics we were able to talk about. And the thought process was, man, if we could just turn on the recorder and play this back for my staff, that would be great. So that's, and plus I'm not nearly as polished as you are, as people can tell from my appearance and your appearance.
It's a lot harder to do what you do. I think if I did produce something every single week, it would be the grabbing somebody and filming them and having that content be out there. And that's really important. And I've had people ask me, Bill, like, hey, can you make your podcast shorter or create sound bites because we don't have time to listen for 25 minutes? And I'm like, wow, okay. I hadn't thought about, I just was sort of, I'm like, I don't know at this point. Like I haven't thought about shortening it to be sound bites because it's really about a singular topic. It's like a mini vignette of going to like class and hearing from, people like David Finn and Dr. Anthony Chang and yourself. And it's like, you get 25 minutes of their brain. It's pretty special. And so I hadn't thought about parsing it out. So I think what is great is both formats work for our industry, and the fact that all of us come together. You mentioned John Manis. He and I are co-teaching at Chimes Spring Boot Camp in Chicago next month. We're like so excited because we both have such a high energy level, and we're teaching networking in terms of like building a brand and creating relationships, that we have to keep paring down our content because we have too much to share with the audience.
Yeah, I can see that. John just landed at Christus in Dallas, which is pretty exciting, and look forward to seeing what he's going to do there. So let's, actually, I always start with the softball because I never know what's going on in your world. So, what are you working on that you're excited about, or that you think would be interesting to the listeners?
Sure, it's actually sort of partially one of the topics we touch on today as well. But I believe most people know, I have accepted a new role in my organization. So I've historically, and probably since 2010, been a regional CIO for one Fortune X company or another, primarily really two. And now that we are moving towards a close of Optum Care as part of Healthcare Partners DaVita Medical Group, we are ever closer to that transaction being complete. And there was a need identified by our CIO. His name is Lachlan Tidmarsh, and he said, we really need at your level an individual who understands culture, the communication, the training, the skills that are required for us to build a world-class IT organization that is flexible and meeting the customers where they are and understanding how all the strategies connect, et cetera. Would you be interested in taking on that role for the organization? And I said, absolutely. It's funny, I'm sure people ask really important questions, Bill, like, what's my comp? What's my future? What's this? All I said was, do I have to move? And he said, no. And I'm like, I'm in. The rest will figure itself out. So I'm really grateful that we call the role IT VP management, VP of IT change management. We chose that because it was IT enough to be allowed for us to be very flexible in what we deliver, but it's more than just ITIL, which is a foundation of what it is we're going to be doing, but it's also the ProSci models and all of the different things that bring your organization together to really create a best place to work in IT. So it's pretty exciting because I get to take everything I've ever done in my career and apply it to all levels of the organization. And so I tell people, at some point you get to do what you want and live where you want and work for the company that you want. And those are all really exciting things to line up, because when all of your passions come together, it's really unstoppable in what you can create for an organization.
Man, that's exciting, and that's an exciting role for you. And we could just start there. So you're going, and the organization's pretty large. It's going to be a couple thousand people, I assume. And we talked about this before. What are the numbers?
Once we close the Optum Care side of the business, we'll have essentially about 14 plus care delivery organizations with 2,500 to 3,000 IT teammates, and we are anticipated to triple in size by 2025 as a business footprint, obviously support services, et cetera. So we'll just keep growing and getting bigger and delivering amazing patient care and quality and all the things that are important with a world-class IT organization behind it to make sure that it can be as seamless as possible.
And talent is so important. Identifying the right talent, attracting the right talent, retaining the right talent. And in order to do that, one of the things you talk about a fair amount when you come on the show is really focusing in on the employee experience or the staff experience and how they're communicated with, how they function within the organization. One of the things we don't think about much is, we're purveyors of change. We're constantly coming in and saying, hey, let's do cloud, let's upgrade the EMR, let's do this, let's do that. But all those things actually impact the IT staff as well. And that's part of the job as well, is helping them to navigate their careers and navigate all those changes. So what do you envision, some of the tools or some of the things that you're going to bring to that role?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because recently there was just a fantastic research article written by Dion Hinchcliffe from Constellation Research. And his article was literally creating an employee experience as great as your customer experience. And for me, I think about that being really that digital space. When you think of how much time teammates spend on feeding work systems manually and cobbling together ad hoc experiences and going across dozens of apps and looking and digging through data. And let's be honest, as IT professionals, we will live with the pain the longest and make it part of just the routine of how we work around it. So if we have mapping issues, if we have to go to multiple data sources to write reports, if our printer's broken, we tend to find a workaround rather than actually sometimes just dig in and fix it, because we're worried about fixing everybody else's needs first, which is why we're great servant leaders, I think, in IT. But when you start thinking about the tools that come together, so, we're going to Office 365, which isn't new. I mean, so many people have it, we're moving towards it, et cetera. But I think about how we integrate not only the Office 365 experience, but also start to bring some of those collaboration tools into place. I realize that when you have the team rooms and you have the ability to engage teammates on their smartphones, doing active pulse surveys for engagement, thinking about how we do process completion, thinking about the whole life cycle of a teammate when they come into the organization, how they can collaborate, how they can use tools, how they can manage remote workforces and work together. Those are all those pieces when we have like a dense and rich digital landscape. We can be that much more productive, and it becomes a space where it's easy to do business within your own organization. So we start with the Office 365 platform. We're going to knock the heck out of that one out of the park. And every piece that's available, we're doing great collaboration with our Microsoft partners. And then we start to use different tools within our teammate engagement surveys, whether it's pulse surveys on your phone, other ways to just check in and see how teammates are doing. You create an environment where that constant feedback loop is available. Because with any level of engagement, it's always about a point in time, but if you're always aware what's happening in your organization, then you can quickly pivot to address the things, whether it's onboarding or promotions or allowing them to have a life event or moving to a new area of our business because they've been promoted, it's geographically they have to go somewhere. If you make all of those things seamless, then it's part of something that they want to promote and share with others as well. And I not only want this amazing team internally, but I want people to see us as a beacon of where they want to come and work. So we're always attracting the best talent in the industry.
I appreciate you doing most of the talking since I'm sick and struggling to get through this podcast. But I want to dive a little deeper on surveys. You mentioned it a couple of times, and I found it to be a really good tool to use. What do you find to be really important about doing surveys? Because there's a right way to do surveys and a wrong way to do surveys, and if you don't follow up on the feedback and provide communication back to the organization as you're getting that feedback and how you're implementing it, that can be a big fail. Even though you said, well, we did the surveys, but you still have to follow up. So give us an idea of how you think about surveys, what kind of things you think are important to do right, and some things to avoid.
Sure. So most companies do the annual IT teammate engagement survey, whether they're using Gallup or Aon or Qualtrics or whomever. Pick a vendor, you do your giant survey. You get your dashboards and results, and here's the things you're good at, and here's the things you're not good at, et cetera. That's well and good, and it's important because it gives you a pulse of where you are. But as I said earlier, it's a point in time. And when you create these massive mobilization efforts around all the things that you found, it gets stale very quickly because you don't have a way to measure it in between before the next annual survey. So we've basically taken the 3 or 4 questions that we know are most important to the health and well-being of our teammates and asking them those every quarter and saying, how are you doing? Do you like your job? You're kind of miserable, like what's going on? And, are you getting what you need from your leadership team? Are you getting what you need from a professional development perspective? Is there anything else we should be doing for you or know about? Taking all that information and then sharing it. And then we have a teammate appreciation group. We call them TAG. It's fun. We call it Tag Your It because it's IT. And taking that information and saying, here's what we're hearing, what do we want to do about it? So it's real and it's actionable all of the time. So you're giving all the updates in between these surveys and sharing what's happening in the organization. And then you retest yourself or quiz yourself in about 3 or 4 months and say, did we make progress on these? And we just started this process. And what's phenomenal is people are coming out of the woodwork and saying, it's this thing, it's that thing, it's this one class that I want to have, et cetera. So we're creating an environment of transparency. People are coming and sharing with us on a regular basis. I can't wait to launch all this into Microsoft Office, into Office 365 with either the Teams rooms or other things we have available, because then it's like that constant piece. It's not a push and receive. It's a continuous process. But when people know you're honest about it, Bill, there's a whole team dedicated to it. They start telling you what they really want. It's your job to do something about it.
Yeah, it's I guess the question I want to ask you is, what's your favorite question? I mean, one of the questions we asked in one of the surveys was, is your role clear to you? Do you understand what your role is? Is it clear to you? And it was an 80-20 split. So there's 20% of the people coming in every day saying, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing or what my role is. Well, that was a huge eye opener for me and for our management team to say, all right, we're not doing a good enough job. If 20% of the people are coming in every day and not clear on what they should be doing, that's basic blocking and tackling. So we went about correcting that. Is there a question that you ask that you're like, wow, this really gets to the heart of it, or has really shown you something that surprised you?
The question I like is, how am I feeling about my work? How am I feeling about my job today? Is it I'm happy or I'm kind of miserable? And then having them give us feedback as to what is creating an environment where they wouldn't want to come to work at any given particular time. And you think about that because, what creates an environment where a teammate can do their best work or where they're going to be happy? And because it's anonymous, we get a sense for it. But the question is, how's a teammate doing at work instead of in general? And if they're happy, great. And if they're not, they're going to tell us why. So I love that one. How are you feeling? You miserable? You happy? What can we do about it?
Well, I'm miserable because I'm sick, but I'm generally happy in my job. The other question I have always around this, and I think you're so good with your staff, is the reason I'm going deep with you on this
Yeah.
question, is most people leave organizations because of their direct manager,
Mhm.
right? We just know that to be true. People, they might love you as a CIO, and they're leaving from a certain department because their direct manager doesn't listen to them, or whatever the characteristics are. What are you looking for in a manager, and how do you identify ways to help those managers to uh, make sure that they're at a level that's serving the organization well and serving their staff well?
Yeah, it's an interesting approach because different philosophies on what makes a good manager. And what happens in IT very often is you have teammates who have risen through the ranks that are very technical versus being more teammate focused. And there's two philosophies here. There's the need to create an environment where teammates can move up technically, and they can move up into the management of teammate space. And you can they don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can create competencies within a teammate that allow them to manage technology well or manage teammates well. And then they have a choice. So when you have two tracks of success, the thing is, if you're not managing teammates and having to have some of those more delicate conversations or be able to negotiate or be diplomatic, et cetera, you're still going to have those conversations with vendors and customers. And so the skill sets aren't that different, no matter what you want to do with them. But one of the things that I believe is important is I always look for a level of curiosity when I'm bringing new teammates into the organization. So, the resume, if like a technical calling card, great. You know how to do all the things we need you to do. I ask people things like, what do they do for fun? What are they reading? What are they curious about? How they approach situation X? And it's not typical things. I joke that we recently hired our communications manager, and she's phenomenal. We hired her back in November. She started in November. And I asked her what she did for fun, and she told me baking was one of the things she likes to do. And I'm like, what do you bake? And I tell people, if she had said chocolate chip cookies, I wouldn't have hired her, but she makes lemon lavender pound cake. And I was like, you're hired. And it's the uniqueness, and I want them to appropriately push the envelope. So I will ask questions like, here's the stakeholders creating this environment. What are you going to do about it? And I don't want a canned answer. I want that thoughtful approach. There's two things I look for. If you can be authentic and you know how to communicate well, there's a good chance you're going to succeed as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great. Let's get a little nerdy, geeky, whatever you want to call it. One of the topics that you sent over and I like is Windows Virtual Desktop. So give us an idea of what's going on in that space. This is another one of those moves into the cloud that I think we're seeing from a lot of different angles now.
Yeah, so I think when you think about the traditional role of the CIO or CTO or CDO and all these different teammates that really create the encompass office of the office of the CIO or the office of IT, we can't forget about what really is that foundational layer of infrastructure and operations. Like, you never get away from it. It's probably where we all started as well. And the expense of IT continues in a lot of ways to go up. So as we think about how we've moved things to the cloud or virtualization, there's always been this like ongoing cost of desktop and some of that infrastructure. So now that Windows Virtual Desktop is in public preview and something you can partition through the cloud, you think about being able to bring the cost down of your security updates, of how often you have to update your machines. It's a huge benefit for Office 365 users. I think it was last year when Microsoft bought FS Logix to streamline application provisioning in a virtualized environment. So they're trying to pick up all these pieces to make it so that, and I get there's a one-to-one relationship in some of your clinical settings. For the most part, when you can bring like single user Windows 7 virtual desktop infrastructure, Windows 10 and remote server and Azure and all those things together, just allows you to just put your money into other things like digital transformation and not have to always worry about some of the blocking and tackling. So it's pretty fun to see it and the cost reduction that can occur in that, because you want to drive down the cost of the things that are always going to be a blocking and tackling mechanism, so you can reinvest those dollars in the big shiny things that we know we need to head toward digital transformation and AI, which are actually really becoming things we can sink our teeth into as leaders today.
Yeah. And, I should get Microsoft to sponsor this show. But, and so, fairness on the other side, at my previous employer, what we did was the Citrix environment,
Mm-hmm.
and every clinical workstation was a Citrix workstation
Mm-hmm.
on thin clients. And the rationale was almost exactly what you're saying, which was at the time, we had over 50% of our clinical workstations were end of life. And so we had to replace a significant amount of them over a short period of time. And we were looking at, first of all, the overall cost, and then we were looking at the, the life cycle, right? And so if you're looking at a standard desktop and putting it out there, you can stretch it to 4 years, but nobody really wants to be on a 5-year-old computer trying to do things. But a thin client, we actually could get 8 to 10 years of life cycle on it, because it's a thin client. It's not a smart client, and all the processing and whatnot is being done in the central server farm. And we saw a significant increase in productivity, drop in calls, because fixing some of these calls is pretty easy. It's resetting the virtual session. It's your techs aren't walking around with parts anymore. They're walking around with whole thin clients. And if for some odd reason the thin client's the problem, they can replace that thin client in a couple of minutes and away they go. But almost 99% of those calls is something software related. But the challenge, as you sort of pointed out, is the cost of that back-end infrastructure, the Citrix environment, the Imprivata environment, and building all that stuff out from scratch. This is the advantage that Microsoft may have in this space, because they can do sort of an integrated approach. And quite frankly, I think the biggest advantage that Microsoft has is they already have agreements with every health system. And it just, I mean, that agreement, you just sit there and you check a box, and now all of a sudden you have, Windows Virtual Desktop, and you have Azure, and you have whatever, just by checking a box. It's that sales approach makes it so much easier than, say, going out and building it from scratch with somebody else's technology. I'm not sure there's a question there. I was just sort of adding to what you were saying.
No, it makes sense. And you find that they're finally coming, I feel like they're starting to take all of their products and make them work well together. They're starting to realize that they can't just be the best one-off, and they're starting to realize that, you don't need to have extra licensing to this provisioning, and here's how we can make it work from a security perspective, and here's how you bring these pieces, really connect them in a way that doesn't have sticker shock for all of us, because so many of us, Bill, have been conditioned to be willing to pay exorbitant fees for the best products, and we do that with our EMRs, et cetera. Then you get partners like Imprivata who come in and say, hey, there's this great new technology in here, here's how we're already in front of it and marrying it. So the best of the best are coming together, and they're doing it with really the benefit of the end user in mind. Everyone's making money, but I feel like I'm finally not going to a gouging session when I'm having some of these conversations with some of my vendor partners.
Yeah, and they really get the business now. It's interesting. You walk around HIMSS and you stop into the floor, and they talk about specific practices within healthcare and how they're going to help that, how they're going to help oncology or health. And it's the technical conversations are now getting to be very practical, which I appreciate. Speaking of that, so we have you and I have talked about digital transformation before, but there was a great conversation between Toby Cosgrove and Ed Marks recently, and we've highlighted it on on LinkedIn and other things from This Week in Health IT. And I figured you'd be Ed would probably be the best person to talk to about it, but he's a little busy right now. So I figured the two of us could talk about it a little bit. Toby had very pragmatic guy, a lot of very interesting things to say that I thought were very practical to health IT. What are some of the things around digital transformation that you really got out of the talk?
What I really appreciated, and this is always I always put a leadership lens on first, and you had highlighted this as well, is that you have to do your job better than anybody else expects you to do it, and you have to work for a great organization. And it's interesting how many of my colleagues are pushing a rope in some cases and trying to get digital transformation out the door, or saying, here's all these great things we're seeing and doing. When you get partnership from the top, and our leadership team just had their retreat this last week, and they said, hey, you know what, digital transformation is where we're going to double down and on these specific topics. And so once your leadership teams and your executives get what that means, hey, this means we're going to see 50%, 70%, 80% more patients through a digital experience, or we're going to invest in bringing our portals together. We're going to actually be very, very transparent in providing information to the patient and not block the data, and make it easy for them to get what they need out of the portal, make it easy for them to transport the records. And then it creates that layer of transparency, so they don't have to go and and park their car and pay to park and wait in the ED if they needed that care. They can literally go to their smartphone bill, connect to their own healthcare organization and say, this is what I need you for today, triage it there, and then get to that next level or appropriate care setting. But it's really that continued push of consumerism of meeting patients where they are. We actually are creating and delivering technologies that are making that possible. And I love that when Ed and Toby talked about it, they've made it an absolute, everybody in Cleveland Clinic knows the push towards digital transformation and how to solve for that equation in that environment. So it's not just somebody's random idea, it is collectively an organizational philosophy that they have developed.
Yeah, and it's really hard. I love the, push the rope kind of analogy. If you're in an organization that's still struggling with digital transformation, or if they're saying things like, we're not sure the cloud is secure, and the cloud's as secure as your practices and policies and procedures allow it to be. I mean, the tools are there to make it secure, and your willingness to make it secure, but not to get caught in that one spot. If you're the only one in the organization saying, hey, we might want to get in front of televisits, we might want to get in front of telehealth, we might want to get in front of other convenience type aspects and wayfinding and some other things that make the consumer experience better. I still remember one of my first weeks, I said the word consumer in a meeting, and I was pulled aside and somebody said, yeah, you shouldn't use that word anymore. And I thought, oh boy, that's not a good sign. Well, because remember back in 2011, we weren't talking about the healthcare consumer. But I was from outside of healthcare, so I was sort of naive, and I'm looking at it going, well, these people are consumers, right? We want them to choose us, and they just looked at me like, they wanted to pat me on the head and say, you don't get it yet, but someday you will. But in reality, what's happening today in 2019 is more and more people are recognizing that there is an emerging healthcare consumer. I wouldn't say that they have complete choice, but there's a drive towards it. You're seeing it with CMS. You're seeing it with the new rules. You're seeing it with new entrants into the market. Well, heck, you'll see it with your company. Kaiser does half of their visits now are virtual visits, and so your competitors are starting to move the needle in terms of what people expect and what they understand is possible now from a healthcare organization. And if all they have to do is experience that once, and you might say, well, where are they going to experience it? Well, I'm in Pennsylvania working with my parents and my in-laws on their health, and I might experience it by helping them and go, wow, this is amazing. This is what I'm getting in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Why can't I get this in Southern California? And so people have a lot of different outlets where they can experience different health systems, and that will continue to change their expectations of what's possible and what they should expect. And I think that's important to find that organization that matches your vision, or at least one that you can influence that vision and push it. Not that it's all on you, but that the organization feels like it's heading in that direction.
Yeah, it's some of this stuff is now table stakes. Like, to me, a video visit to see your PCP if you have strep throat at 10 p.m. on a Friday, it should be table stakes.
Yeah, it really should be. And we get caught up in mostly operational items. It's not the technology items that's slowing us down in that respect. One of the things that Toby Gosgrove did talk about was AI, and he and Ed were talking about, what's the one thing that you've seen that you think is really going to impact healthcare? And he said, AI, hands down, is going to change so many aspects of healthcare. Where are you at on AI, and what's your current thinking, and what are you telling your organization about it?
What do you think? So AI it's one of those things that becomes it becomes so big. It's the elephant. Like, how do you eat it one bite at a time? And I'm like, go after the things. I don't know if you were, there was the recent innovation summit, The Economist hosted, and they really talked about the components of AI that are poised to help healthcare in the easiest way. So we always think about it like diagnosing the patient, and, did Watson go read 5 articles and spit out, hey, you should go take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning? Or is there the ability to cultivate millions and millions and millions of pieces of information and data and ask you thoughtful questions about helping to create your diagnosis, which is why no matter how advanced AI becomes, you're still going to need that art of the physician to interpret and deliver the data and have a thoughtful conversation. When I think about AI, I mean, there's that huge patient-facing push, which is absolutely important. I want to know that if have been hiking in Maine and I'm in Southern California and have all these weird symptoms, that the system's going to be thoughtful enough to say, oh, well, you were in this part of Maine and there's Lyme disease present in that area, and maybe ask questions to help diagnose it. But let's use it for things that are like low-hanging fruit. Let's use it for things like these patients are going to have a hard time paying their bills, or these patients are going to have a hard time being medication adherent because of these factors in their life, and approving access to emergency care based on rural areas, or those critical access hospitals that are harder to get to in certain areas, but you're seeing a prevalence of these types of conditions. I mean, using it for the basic blocking and tackling, it doesn't have to be profound. It can be like, these people are gonna have a hard time paying their bill, and here's what we can do to help them ahead of time. That's where I like to see the emergence of AI coming into healthcare. At least if no one knows where to start, or if you had to like jump into it, those are some areas where it really can be beneficial to your org.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of operational areas to get quick wins before you go head over heels into the clinical area, because there is still a pushback on the clinical side until people get comfortable with it, and that's true of any new technology. And I'm not sure if we learned anything from the EMR, it's including people in the decision, bringing them along, allowing them to speak into how the technology would best serve them, and getting those wins. But you talk about billing, and some of those things are operationally focused, and easily you could use machine learning and AI on top of machine learning to really make your entire revenue cycle team, and in a lot of different areas. I always talk about security within IT. If IT wants to dabble with AI, there's a whole bunch of AI tools around security. And if you want to talk about one area where AI can really help, it's culling all those log files that you have. It's identifying bad behaviors on the network, because machine learning and AI doesn't sleep, and we need to sleep. So it's good to know that there's tools out there that are constantly monitoring your network and identifying those areas. So that's one of the areas I think we can get some quick wins.
Well, when I talk about the clinical aspect of it, I mean, like, while you can get some business quick wins out of AI, because there's still the whole interoperability issue, how you can push and help make comments on the ONC and CMS rules, but we really create that environment for open data sharing. That's where those biggest pieces of AI start to plug in for the true improvement of some of the patient care issues. You've got to have access to that data, which has always been one of the issues. Every from Azar and Verma, we're talking about it at HIMSS on stage, to, okay, well, now that there's new rules to improve it, what are some of the things that we can do? And that's where we can make the biggest impact right now, is being aware of and involved in the decisions that are being made. Because I see those rules, and it's great. It's going to affect like 125 million patients if we can do it right. But it's still Medicaid, CHIP, MA, qualified plans. There's that whole sector of America that's important. And then I think, what about me? Like, what about people like you and me? Like, we're still using regular public commercial healthcare, and having that same availability of that information for us too, because we're not in a government sponsored program right now.
Yep, absolutely. Well, next week is the Health Data Palooza in DC, which is a great event. We'll learn a lot of what's going on around interoperability and what the CMS enhancements and rule changes have really done for us. Sarah, as always, it's great having you on the show. Thank you for coming on. Best way for people to follow you?
Best way to follow me is LinkedIn, super active there, Sarah Richardson. And then for Twitter is @ConciergeLeader.
Concierge Leader, absolutely. This show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you can check out the website at thisweekinhealthit.com or the YouTube channel at thisweekinhealthit.com/video. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.